Okay, so let us look at the Dudaei Reuven on Parshas Metzorah. Parshas Metzorah, really, it's this week is a double portion. It's actually Rosh Chodesh as well. That's why on Friday morning, by the way, we're doing a sunrise davening. We're making it earlier so that we can bring in the Rosh Chodesh the proper way. So we're praying at 6:05. So we could pray the Rosh Chodesh davening with sunrise at 6:23, but it's a double portion, and we also do Rosh Chodesh. So it's two Torahs this Shabbos. So Parashas Metzorah is really talking about, the first part of the parasha talks about how the Metzorah, the person who had this biblical disease, which we call tsarat, or in English, probably leprosy or something similar, how he becomes purified. And so the way he becomes purified is, it says, he's brought to the Kohen. This is the law of the Metzorah on the day of his purification, and he's brought to the Kohen. So I'm going to read from the Dudaei Reuven. Dudaei Reuven is always spectacular. I especially found this one to be meaningful and beautiful. And we can all take this message to heart. Everybody on this Zoom, I'm sure, can take this message to heart. I'm speaking to myself and letting you listen. He says, the Talmud, I'm going to give as an introduction, the Talmud in Erechim lists 7 sins which cause a person to get this biblical disease called tsarat. And one of those sins, which is the most popular one associated with it, is lashon hara, speaking bad about somebody else. So the Baal Turim starts off his discussion with a citation of a midrash. He says, the midrash says, Maaseh berochel echad. There was an incident with a rochel, as a merchant who sells perfume. He was going around the cities that were next to Tzipori. He made a proclamation and he said, Man bayu mizban samchaim. He got up and he started declaring, who wants to buy the drug of life? He says, basically, I have a drug that will give you life. Who wants to buy it? Idkina olei Rabbi Yanai. Avayasif upashit betarkolina. So Rabbi Yanai was sitting there, and he wanted to know what was there. He says, Ta sakla zabinli. He says, bring this bag to me and sell it to me. So the merchant says to Rabbi Yanai, he says, you don't need it. Not you or anybody like you. He pressed upon him. Safer to him. The merchant comes, he kept Rabbi Yanai saying, no, I really want this drug, this powerful drug. He takes out the book of Psalms, and then he showed him a verse. What was the verse he showed him? From Psalms. Mi ha'ish hachafetz chaim. Who is the man who desires life? Ohev yamim leros tov. He loves days and he wants to see good. Netzor lashon chameira usfasecha medaber mirma. Somebody, netzor lashon chameira. He guards your tongue from speaking bad. So somebody who loves life and wants to see good should guard your tongue from speaking bad. Usfasecha, on your lips, from speaking deceitfully. Somebody who desires life and wants to see good should if you love life, don't speak bad about people. Amar Rabbi Yanai. So Rabbi Yanai says, all the days of my life, I was reading this verse and I didn't know what it meant until you came here and told me. That's why Moshe told the Jewish people, this is the law of the Metzorah, Hamotzi Shemra. Who is the one who gets this leprosy? Metzorah stands for Motzi Shemra, one who speaks bad about other people. That's the Midrash. The Dudaei Reuven has a lot of questions about this Midrash. He has a lot of questions. He says, first and foremost, why did Rabbi Yanai seem so shocked? He was a great rabbi. Why did he seem so shocked by this explanation? He says, oh, wow, I never understood this verse. The verse is obvious. The verse says, who loves life, who wants to live a long life, don't speak bad about other people. And now when this merchant told it to me, all of a sudden said, wow, I never realized that. Well, what did he think the verse meant? That's the first thing. Number two, what's the connection between this verse and the Metzorah? I know he could break up the Metzorah as Motzi Shem Ra, but it's not direct. It's indirect connection. Why does he feel there's such a strong connection? So the Dudaei Reuven says the sages said that a person gets tsaras because they speak bad about other people. And we should be able to explain the punishment of tsaras as a measure for measure punishment. The punishment of tsaras is a measure for measure punishment for your actions. Because you speak bad about people, therefore, you're going to be isolated from the community. You're going to be sent out of the community with these afflictions upon you. And you have to sit by yourself in quarantine until you become ready to re-enter into society. So it seems like it's measure for measure. But the Dudaei Reuven points out, if we look closely at the punishment or at the actions of the punishment of Lashon Hara, we see that it's not just to correct. This is the point of the Dudaei Reuven. We're not just trying to correct this person's spiritual future in the world to come, and he needs to repent, but we're also trying to improve his life in this world. Meaning to say, it's not just that if you gossip about people, you're going to be hurting them, and therefore you're going to be punished in the world to come. But also, if you're living a life in which you're speaking bad about other people, you're also going to be ruining your life in this world. You're ultimately going to be a person who is not living their best life. And this is how he explains it. He says, the eye sees, he develops his idea, so I'm going to try and read it and translate it for a little bit. He says, the eye sees and the ear hears that somebody who has this terrible quality of always gossiping, speaking bad, he's not going to be able to live with those people who are around them. And so therefore, causes this person to really become less of a person who people want to spend time with. And nobody wants to rely on such a person. He becomes himself somebody who's just not an appealing person to be around. And so therefore, we know from experience, he's not citing a source, he's just telling us, we know from experience that those people who speak nicely, then those people, other people want to be around. And so therefore, they want to be near such a person. And it's something that makes it more appealing. And so people want to spend more time with them. So therefore, this is what he's saying. Who is the person who desires life? Meaning at first glance, everybody thought that this merchant was coming along, to sell an actual drug. And so therefore, it'll give them the drug that will give them the afterlife, will give them a lot of rewards. And so therefore, Rabbi Yanai says, sell me this drug. However, the merchant refused. He said, because this drug is not for you. But when Rabbi Yanai continued, he said, this is the verse. What does it mean? This is how he says it. Man who wants to acquire life? It relates to the verse of who wants life? Somebody who guards their mouth and their tongue. Somebody guards themselves from speaking in this manner. Meaning to say, at first, Rabbi Yanai understood that the verses were promising the world to come to somebody who refrains from bad. And then he explained, no, that if you want to benefit from this world, you will never be a person who speaks bad. If you take upon yourself not to speak bad, you will benefit much more in this world. And so that is the idea, the first idea that the Dudaei Reuven is saying. And so therefore, when the Torah says this is the law of the Metzorah, he says somebody who speaks bad about somebody, he's going to become isolated from the community. He's going to be living in isolation. And this is going to be basically the consequence of living that type of life. So how do we deal with such a person? Such a person is brought to the Kohen. Therefore, the Dudaei Reuven says, why does he go to the Kohen? Now, the Dudaei Reuven is a Kohen, and he's also a rabbi. And I think that this is going to impact what he says. He says, the Metzorah is brought to the Kohen. Why? If he has this condition, if he has this disease, why isn't he brought to the doctor? So he says, no, because the Metzorah does not have a physical condition, but rather a spiritual condition. And so therefore he needs to come to the Kohen first, because who is the Kohen? The Kohen is the spiritual giant. He's going to inspire him, and he's going to teach him about the Torah, and he's going to teach him how to act. And as a result of this, a person will come to a better way to live their life, to living their best life. And so therefore, he says, Saras, which is a consequence of Lashon Hara, of speaking bad, its source comes from jealousy and hatred and stinginess and a narrow soul. And so that Rabbi Eliezer taught in Pirkei Avos that somebody who lives life like this is going to basically cause themselves to live and remove themselves from the world. And so therefore, the way to heal this is spiritually, by living a life less stingy, less focused on hurting other people, and more of expansiveness, and somebody who's inspired, living a life of inspiration. And that's the first lesson of the Dudaei Reuven. I just want to summarize what he's saying. He's saying, what was the teaching to Rabbi Yanai? Rabbi Yanai had thought that the verse meant that if you don't gossip, you'll have supernatural reward in the world to come. He says, no, that's not what it's saying. It's saying, yeah, you'll get that reward in the world to come, but the real reward of not gossiping is that you'll live a better life in this world. You'll live a life where you'll have better friends, more meaningful community, a greater sense of belonging and of happiness. And that's why the cure for tsaras is to go to the Kohen, because it's not a physical condition as much as it is a spiritual condition. And you need to be spiritually inspired to recognize that you're not going to live your life with arrogance or with gossip or with stinginess, but rather with expansiveness and trying to do good for others. That's the first point. But then he says, why specifically the Kohen? He says, we can find this if we analyze who is the Kohen. Who is the Kohen? This is what he said. He says, who do people love to speak badly about? Who do people like to speak badly about? Typically speaking, people always like to criticize the leaders. That's what it is. That's what it is. Naturally speaking, who do people criticize? They criticize. It's almost like there's that people say the laws of Lashon Hara don't apply to the heads of the community or to the rabbis or to the leaders. And so who was the Kohen? The Kohen was the spiritual leader. So therefore, the Torah says specifically there's a prohibition against cursing a judge. It says, Elohim lo sikalel. You're not allowed to curse a judge. Because people might have thought, okay, why do you're not allowed to curse anyone? Why does it specifically need to say you're not allowed to curse a judge? Because people might have thought, listen, he's not a real person. He's the judge. I could gossip about him. And so therefore, And so therefore, you might have thought you're allowed to do it. He says a little bit of a tangent. He says, the nations of the world like to put all their problems and blame them on the Jewish people. And so therefore, they like to turn it on the Jewish people. And so too, in that manner, we like to assume that all the problems typically come from the leaders. And the Talmud says, he turns around the Talmudic statement. The Talmudic statement says, all the punishments come upon the people because of the judges. He says, no. The Dudaei Reuven says, no. It's not that the punishments come because of the judges. He says the punishments come because everybody's gossiping about the judges, criticizing the judges, because everybody's acting with chutzpah towards these judges. And so that's why the punishments come on the world. And so therefore, he says, he paints this scene, which I never thought about before. He paints this very interesting scene. How does somebody become a Metzorah? How does somebody become tsaras? Only from the Kohen. You have to go to the Kohen, and the Kohen says whether or not you are tsaras or not. Unless the Kohen says it, you don't have tsaras. Unless the Kohen says it, you don't have tsaras. And not only that, until the Kohen says it, you don't have tsaras. So how do you think people are going to react when, let's say, their grandfather has to leave town for 2 weeks because he has tsaras? They'll say, oh, it's that stupid Kohen. Why didn't he look at it the other way? Then they're going to start criticizing the Kohen. They're going to start criticizing the Kohen, and they're going to start saying it's all his fault, even though the Kohen was just doing what the Torah told him. And so as a result of this, people are going to say, look, this person, he's not sensitive. He doesn't understand the people. He doesn't understand the community. And so therefore, the Kohen is not the one who's doing it. The Kohen is trying to do his best. And so therefore, what does the person have to do? We take this person who was isolated, who got the tsaras, and for his purification process, where do we bring him? We have to bring him back to the Kohen. He has to recognize that he's going to work with the leadership of the community. He's not going to be speaking in this manner, in this disrespectful manner. And so it says something similar. He says, I'll say it because we're doing Masechah Sota now. So it says, why does it say the passage of the Sota next to the passage in the Torah that talks about gifts to the Kohen? Because the Sota woman, she is brought to the Kohen because it says that she has to go to the temple. So if you don't give the gifts to the Kohen, in the end, you're going to have to bring the Sota to the Kohen. And so this is a punishment. What the Dudaei Reuven is saying is part of the reason why the Metzorah has to go to the Kohen for the purification is because this Metzorah was speaking in a cynical manner about the Kohen, about the leadership, about the people who are working day and night to try to help the community. So therefore, this person now is going to need the community, need the Kohen for his health. And that's, I think, the Chiddush. That's the Chiddush of the Dudaei Reuven. Why does the Metzorah have to go to the Kohen? Because he was the one. That's how he got tsaras in the first place. And I'll just say a little bit of a soapbox here. And thank God, I'm not complaining at all myself. God forbid, don't read this about being about me, but I'm just saying in general, I noticed that in the Jewish communities, people love to talk about their schools. They love to talk about what do they do on Shabbos. They love to talk about the rabbi. They love to talk about the president. They love to just not be positive about our own communities. That's a huge sin. That's a huge sin. I'm not saying that you should be quiet if there is a wrongdoing or something needs to be fixed, but the way it's often done is not in a spiritual manner. And so I think everybody here who's listening has an ability to have an impact about this. And if you're seeing that people are talking about this, you can just have this Dudaei Reuven in mind and either try to steer the conversation to a positive manner or else change the topic or else leave the room. Those are your three choices if you don't want to commit a sin. Anyway, I'll stop here in case anybody has a question about this Dudaei Reuven.